Now that we have discussed energy and the abiotic environment, we now need to talk about all the living things in the environment. The first thing we need to talk about is biodiversity, or the number and types of different organisms in the environment. There are millions of species that exist right now on Earth, and there were millions of species that have lived on Earth previously but are now extinct. Why do we see such high numbers of different and diverse species in the environment? This was a really important question in the 1800s. Two men, Alfred Russel Wallace and Charles Darwin, independently devised a theory that explained how species arose and how they change through time. The theory of evolution by natural selection. Random genetic changes occur in populations over time. If those changes produce traits that are favorable in certain individuals in the population, those individuals are more likely to survive and reproduce, and they pass on those traits. The frequency of those traits increases in the subsequent generations. Of course, Wallace and Darwin did not know about DNA or genetic material, but they did recognize that traits were passed down from generation to generation. Natural selection is the result of four things: high reproductive capacity, a species produces more offspring than can survive; heritable variation, traits that are favorable must be passed on from parent to offspring; limits to population growth, there are limitations on the amount of individuals that can survive due to resource availability; and differential reproductive success. Some individuals are more likely to reproduce than others. Here is a graphical example of natural selection in a hypothetical population of snails. There are variations in the color of the snails from light red to dark red, with middle shades in between. As you can see from this graph, most snails are a dark pink, a color halfway between light red and dark red. Now, let's say that the light red and the dark red are really maladaptive compared to the dark pink. Individuals of that color are much less successful at surviving and reproducing. What will happen is that those extreme colors will be selected against, and as time goes on, there will be less of them and more of the middle color. This pattern is called stabilizing selection. Eventually, there will be almost entirely the middle color, and the extreme colors will go extinct. If instead, being a darker color is more adaptive, the lighter colors will start to go extinct, and the average individual, or the individuals at the peak of the curve, will be darker. This pattern is called directional selection. Selection is pushing the species towards the darker colorations. Another possibility is that being light red or dark red is adaptive, but being in the middle is maladaptive. In this case, individuals at each extreme will become more common, and the middle of the road colors will decrease, eventually going extinct. This is called disruptive selection. If disruptive selection is strong enough, the two extreme colors of snail might become distinct species. We can rarely see evolution happening in real time, but we can see the results of it, where species have been isolated for thousands of years. Darwin, when visiting the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador, observed many different species of finches that had very specific adaptations. As it turns out, these birds all came from one or a few species of finches that made their way to the Galapagos thousands of years ago. Because the resources on the islands are so diverse but sparse, competition was high, and the birds needed to adapt to utilize different types of resources. This competition led to strong directional selection and resulted in the diversity of finches seen today on the islands. The modern synthesis of the mid-20th century combined Darwin's ideas about evolution with the modern understanding of genetics. This synthesis included fossil research, developmental biology, ecology, and taxonomy. The heritable variation that Darwin predicted was indeed changes in DNA caused by beneficial mutations that conferred an adaptive trait and are then passed down to the next generation. Of course, mutations can also be harmful or have no effect at all.